I'm Dr. Ellen Langer. When people talk about being stuck, they usually blame circumstances money, age, education, timing, or other people. But decades of psychological research, much of it emerging from Harvard, points to a far more uncomfortable truth. Most limitations are not imposed by the world, but quietly constructed by the mind. We don't get trapped by life itself. We get trapped by the way we stop noticing it. At Harvard, research into human behavior has repeatedly shown that the moment we stop paying attention, we start living on autopilot. We repeat yesterday's assumptions, yesterday's labels, and yesterday's identities. Over time, those assumptions harden into what feels like reality. And that is where most people remain, stuck, not because change is impossible, but because it is never questioned. One of the most powerful findings in modern psychology is that the mind does not merely react to the world, it actively shapes it. When people believe their abilities are fixed, their personality is settled, or their future is already written, their behavior quietly adjusts to confirm those beliefs. They stop experimenting. They stop exploring alternatives. They stop seeing options that are right in front of them. Research shows that when individuals are placed into situations where they are encouraged to notice differences rather than cling to categories, their performance, health, and motivation improve. The opposite is also true. When people rely on rigid labels, I'm too old, I'm not creative, that's just how I am, their world shrinks. What they call realism is often just unexamined habit. Most people stay stuck because certainty feels safer than awareness. Mindlessness gives the illusion of control. If you believe you already know who you are and how life works, you don't have to face uncertainty. But that comfort comes at a cost. The moment you decide that something is just the way it is, you stop engaging with it. And what you stop engaging with, you stop influencing. Harvard studies have shown that even small shifts in perspective, subtle changes in how tasks are framed or how roles are defined, can dramatically alter outcomes. This tells us something crucial. The problem is rarely lack of ability, it is lack of attention. People remain stuck because they stop seeing alternatives, not because alternatives don't exist. Mindfulness, in this scientific sense, is not about meditation or silence. It is about actively noticing. It is about recognizing that any situation can be viewed from more than one angle, that any moment contains more than one possibility. When people adopt a mindful approach, they regain a sense of agency. They begin to see that their choices are broader than they once believed. When you become mindful, age becomes information, not a sentence. Experience becomes a resource, not a limitation. Failure becomes feedback, not identity. Research consistently shows that people who adopt this orientation perform better, adapt faster, and feel more alive, not because their circumstances magically change, but because their relationship to those circumstances does. Getting unstuck does not require a dramatic reinvention of your life. It begins with questioning the assumptions you've been repeating without noticing. Ask yourself where your certainty comes from. Ask what you might be overlooking. Ask how else this situation could be understood. The moment you do this, something shifts. The mind loosens its grip on old conclusions. New behaviors become possible, not because you forced them, but because you finally allowed yourself to see differently. This is not positive thinking. It is active thinking. And it is one of the most reliable ways research has shown to restore growth. You are not trapped by reality. You are trapped by assumptions. And this is where most people quietly give up without realizing it. From the outside, their lives look constrained by money, background, age, or opportunity. But underneath all of that is a deeper force at work: unchallenged beliefs. The mind is constantly interpreting the world, and once it decides this is how things are, it stops looking for alternatives. That decision feels like clarity, but it is often the beginning of stagnation. The most dangerous assumptions are the ones that feel obvious. I'm not that kind of person. People like me don't succeed at this. It's too late now. These thoughts don't announce themselves as limits. They present themselves as facts. And once something is treated as a fact, the mind no longer tests it. Research shows that when people believe their abilities, personality, or future are fixed, Their behavior unconsciously adjusts to make that belief true. Effort drops, curiosity fades, risk disappears, not because the person is incapable, but because the mind has already closed the case. Assumptions are not conclusions reached through careful analysis. They are shortcuts. They are often formed early, reinforced socially, and repeated so often that they feel permanent. When someone says, "I've tried before and it didn't work," what they usually mean is, "I've decided this outcome defines what's possible." That single interpretation can override years of potential growth. The brain prefers certainty over accuracy, and assumptions provide that certainty even when they are wrong. What makes this so powerful is that assumptions don't just shape how you think, they shape what you notice. If you assume you're bad at learning new skills, you will notice every small mistake and ignore every improvement. If you assume opportunities are rare, you will overlook them even when they appear. The mind becomes a filter, deleting information that contradicts its own story. This is why two people can live in the same conditions and experience completely different realities. One is responding to circumstances, the other is responding to beliefs. The moment you recognize that an assumption is not a fact, it loses its authority. You don't need to replace it with blind optimism. You only need to treat it as a hypothesis rather than a verdict. When people are encouraged to view their beliefs as temporary interpretations instead of permanent truths, their performance improves, their motivation increases, and their resilience strengthens. Nothing external changes, yet everything internal begins to move. Consider how often people say, "That's just how I am," as if identity were a finished product. This single phrase has kept more people stuck than any external obstacle. Identity, when treated as fixed, becomes a prison, but when seen as flexible and context dependent, it becomes a tool. Research consistently shows that when individuals approach tasks with the mindset of exploration rather than self-definition, they learn faster and adapt better. The shift is subtle but profound. You stop proving who you are and start discovering what you can do. Assumptions feel protective, but they are expensive. They protect you from uncertainty, embarrassment, and temporary discomfort, but they cost you growth. Every time you assume something about your limits, you save yourself the effort of trying and quietly accept the price of staying the same. Over time, this trade becomes invisible and people call it reality, but it is not reality, it is a habit of interpretation. The most effective way to break this pattern is not force or motivation, but attention. Ask what you are assuming. Ask how else this situation could be understood. Ask what evidence you might be ignoring. These questions reopen the mind. They turn fixed beliefs into flexible perspectives, and once flexibility returns, movement becomes natural. The mind was never broken. It was simply convinced that it already knew the answer. Mindlessness keeps you stuck, awareness sets you free, and this distinction explains why so many intelligent, capable people live far below their potential. Mindlessness is not laziness or lack of discipline. It is the state of functioning on automatic pilot, where decisions are made, reactions are triggered, and days are lived without active attention. When this happens, the past quietly takes control of the present. Old habits, old judgments, and old routines begin to run your life without asking your permission. The mind is designed to conserve energy, and one way it does this is by repeating what has worked before. At first, this is useful, but over time, repetition hardens into routine, and routine turns into rigidity. People stop noticing what is actually happening and start responding to what they expect to happen. This is where growth slows and frustration begins. You may feel busy, even exhausted, yet nothing truly changes. The movement is real, but the progress is not. Mindlessness feels efficient, but it is deeply limiting. When you assume you already know, you stop learning. When you label a situation as familiar, you stop paying attention to its details. Research shows that when people approach tasks with the belief that they are routine or already mastered, performance declines. Errors increase, creativity drops, the mind disengages, and with it goes the possibility of improvement. Awareness, by contrast, is an active state. It requires noticing differences, questioning defaults, and remaining open to multiple perspectives. This does not mean overthinking or constant analysis. It means being present enough to recognize that no two moments are identical, even when they look the same. When people are encouraged to notice novelty in familiar situations, their engagement increases. They become more responsive, more adaptable, and more alive in their actions. One of the most powerful aspects of awareness is that it restores choice. Mindlessness removes choice by narrowing perception. You react instead of respond. You repeat instead of explore. Awareness widens the field. Suddenly, you see that there is more than one way to interpret an event, more than one way to respond to a challenge, more than one path forward. This shift alone can change the trajectory of a life, not because circumstances transformed, but because perception did. There is a subtle psychological hook here. Awareness creates energy. People often believe they lack motivation, when in reality, they lack engagement. When the mind is actively noticing, energy follows naturally. Studies have shown that people who are mindful in their work and daily activities report higher satisfaction and lower stress, even when their workload remains the same. Attention, not effort, is what makes the difference. Mindlessness also keeps people trapped in labels. Once you decide something is boring, difficult, or not for you, your attention shuts down. Awareness reopens it. The moment you treat a task as something to be explored rather than endured, your experience changes. You begin to notice small variations, hidden patterns, and new possibilities. What once felt heavy becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes learnable. Awareness interrupts time. When you live mindlessly, days blur together and years pass without meaning. When you live with awareness, time feels fuller. You remember more. You experience more. This is why mindful engagement has been linked to a greater sense of vitality and even perceived youthfulness. Life expands not by adding more years, but by deepening attention within each moment. The greatest cost of mindlessness is not failure, it is missed opportunity. Opportunities rarely announce themselves dramatically. They appear as small variations, subtle signals, or unexpected moments. A mind on autopilot ignores them. A mind that is aware recognizes them. The difference between being stuck and being free is often nothing more than the willingness to pay attention. Awareness does not demand a new life. It demands a new relationship with the one you are already living. Change doesn't require a new life, only a new way of seeing, and this idea challenges one of the most deeply held beliefs about personal growth. Many people assume transformation must be dramatic, a new career, a new identity, a new environment, or a complete reinvention. This belief alone stops progress before it begins. When change is framed as something massive and disruptive, the mind resists it. It feels risky, overwhelming, and unrealistic. As a result, people wait for the right time that never arrives. The truth revealed by decades of psychological research is far more subtle and far more empowering. Change often begins not with action, but with interpretation. The same situation, viewed differently, can produce entirely different outcomes. When people shift how they define a problem, their emotional response changes. When emotions change, behavior follows. Nothing external moves, yet internally, momentum begins to build. This is why two individuals can face the same circumstances and experience completely different levels of growth. When you change how you see something, you change how it works on you. Stress is a clear example. When pressure is interpreted as a sign of incapability, it weakens performance. When it is interpreted as information or challenge, performance improves. The situation is identical, only the lens has shifted. Research consistently shows that reframing experiences can alter motivation, resilience, and even physical well-being. Perspective is not a soft skill, it is a functional one. People often believe they need confidence before they act, but confidence is frequently the result of reinterpretation, not preparation. When you view uncertainty as a threat, you hesitate. When you view it as exploration, you engage. This single shift transforms fear into curiosity. The brain responds differently to curiosity than to fear. Curiosity opens pathways, fear narrows them. By changing the meaning you assign to uncertainty, you unlock behavior that once felt unreachable. Another overlooked hook lies in identity. Many people try to change their lives by changing who they think they are. This approach creates pressure and resistance. A more effective path is to loosen identity rather than rebuild it. When you stop insisting on being a certain kind of person and start allowing yourself to act in different ways depending on context, growth becomes natural. Research shows that people who see themselves as flexible and evolving adapt faster and recover more easily from setbacks. They are not stronger, they are more open. Small perceptual shifts also compound over time. When someone starts noticing effort instead of outcome, learning accelerates. When they notice progress instead of perfection, persistence increases. These shifts may feel minor, but they alter daily behavior, and daily behavior shapes long-term results. This is how change happens without dramatic upheaval. It grows quietly, almost invisibly, until one day the difference is undeniable. You do not need to escape your current life to grow beyond it. Growth does not require abandoning your environment, relationships, or responsibilities. It requires engaging with them differently. When people approach familiar situations with fresh attention, they often discover options they had overlooked for years. What once felt like a dead end becomes a starting point, not because the path changed, but because perception did. The most liberating realization is that you are not behind. The belief that you need a new life often comes from the feeling that you missed your chance. But chances are not events, they are perspectives. When you stop measuring yourself against a fixed timeline and start engaging with where you are, movement begins immediately. Change does not ask you to become someone else. It asks you to see what you have been seeing all along, but differently. Most people stay stuck forever, not because they lack intelligence, talent, or opportunity, but because they mistake familiarity for truth. Harvard research reminds us that the mind is far more flexible than we assume when we choose to use it that way. The question is not whether change is possible. The question is whether you are willing to notice what you have been ignoring. The moment you stop living by old labels and start paying attention again, you are no longer stuck. You are simply in motion.